Today we're going to get to some more empirical studies from across the globe, I can say, from the panels that are outlined for today. I have to remind you that if you, so the first two sessions are in English, and if you want to have translation, there is translation, English to French only, and there are, the headphones are available in front of this room. So if you want to get one, please get one from the corridor outside the hall. My name is Peter Scholte. I'll be chairing the first sessions of today. I'll be very strict chair because we have a very strict time schedule. We lost 15 minutes. I'm sure we're going to make up for that 15 minutes in the coming sessions. We have back-to-back presentation of the papers. So 25 minutes presentation, really maximum 25 minutes. I'll give the presenters a sign when your last 5 minutes have begun. I'll give you a sign. Then we have 10 minutes, maximum 10 minutes of questions. It's really maximum. So it doesn't matter how many fingers are still in the air. After 10 minutes, I have to be tough. 4 presentations now, and if at the end we have a little bit of room left, which I hope, then we can have room for more plenary debate, and I hope to be able to confront the findings from the different papers also at the end. Then for the morning session we have one change of program, because Professor Tariq Moudoud, he has to travel to the US. And although the US is very nearby, and I've been told that you can almost see it from the skyscrapers here in Montreal, right? Still, it is very hard to travel there in the US. And there are some complications, which of course Tariq Moudoud, he has to leave a little bit early. That's why we start with Tariq's presentation, and then we go to Professor Francesco as the second presentation. Yes? Then I would like to invite Professor Tariq Moudoud as the first presenter. We're very, very honored to have him here for many reasons, but I just select 2. One is that he is one of the leading, I would say at the global scale, one of the leading theorists on multiculturalism. I think everybody who has studied something related to multiculturalism or diversity knows the readings of Tariq Moudoud. I have almost grown up with the readings of Tariq Moudoud. This is just to increase the pressure, Tariq. And the second thing is because Tariq is presenting on a very recent Commission on Religion in the UK, which I think very relevant for today's session. Let's see also whether the lessons of the Bouchard-Taylor committee and other committees are also taken for more contemporary commissions on similar topics. Tariq, please.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that lovely introduction, no pressure type introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to thank Solange, though I can't quite see whether she's in the room, for organizing this and inviting me to join this discussion. And I'm honored to be able to present in front of Gerard Bouchard, who's just arrived, and Charles Taylor. So as Peter said just now, I'm going to very much talk about a British commission, a very recent British commission, and I won't directly say anything about the Bouchard-Taylor commission, though if you want to ask some comparative questions, of course, please do. So you'll see that this commission was called the Commission on Religion in British Public Life, a bit of a mouthful. I will refer to it as CORAB. It was convened by the Wolf Institute, Cambridge, and chaired by Baroness Butler-Schloss, and it reported in December 2015. It was the fulfillment of one of the recommendations of the Commission on Multi-Ethnic Britain, sometimes known as the Perec Commission or the Perec Report. Peter talked about it yesterday, which under the chairmanship of Lord Professor Bhikkhu Parekh reported in 2000. Its recommendations included the one at the bottom, just there, a commission on the role of religion in the public life of a multi-faith society should be set up to make recommendations on legal and constitutional matters. And I should make clear what perhaps is already clear, but just in case it's not, a declaration of interest, that I was a member of both these two commissions that I've just referred to. CORAB ran from 2013 to 2015, and its terms of reference were these. A, consider the place and role of religion and belief in contemporary Britain and the significance of emerging trends and identities. B, examine how ideas of Britishness and national identity may be inclusive of a range of religions and beliefs and may in turn influence people's self-understanding. C, explore how shared understandings of the common good may contribute to greater levels of mutual trust and collective action and to a more harmonious society. D, make recommendations for public life and policy. While the terms of reference do not refer to race, ethnicity, or even minorities, it should be clear that religion has primarily entered public life, political debates, mobilization, and policy making because of, in Britain as in the rest of Western Europe and beyond, the presence, assertiveness, and terrorism of Muslims, even though, of course, the terrorism in question is supported, let alone engaged in, by a very small, tiny proportion of Muslims. A good way to approach the CORAB is through the argument that Britain consists of a Christian legacy, new faiths, and the non-religious. More especially, that current debates about multiculturalism in relation to religion can, I think, be seen in terms of three contending forces, which may be expressed in the contentions that Britain's public institutions and national identity should reflect that it is one, still predominantly a Christian country, two, now a multi-faith country, three, mainly a secular country. So I'm saying there are these three contending forces all present in Britain today. And I might illustrate that just by reference to demography. Because I think the new demographic context can be characterized as this, that there's a continuing decline of Christianity, there's a large increase in non-religious beliefs and identities, and there's an unmistakable presence of minority religions. To just spell that out in a little bit more detail. So approaching this demographically, according to the census, the number of people who identified themselves as Christians in England and Wales, that's what I mean by E&W at the top, E&W, England and Wales, declined from 71% to 58% between 2001 and 2011, the two censuses. While the censuses are of the full population, they are a relatively superficial measure of identification. In this regard, it is best to supplement the census with the British Social Attitudes, or what we call the BSA, the British Social Attitudes Survey findings, which is what CORAB does. The BSA, which includes Scotland, so not just England and Wales, the BSA only has a sample of 3,000, but it is a systematic, purposive attitude survey and has been measuring religious attitudes annually since 1984. It shows that Christian identification has gone down from 68% in 1984 to 43% in 2014. This shows a steeper drop than the census, and so we might suppose that Christian identification has different meanings in different contexts, and/or the true picture is somewhere between the two figures, the census figures and the BSA figures. The BSA offers data by Christian denominations and shows, I haven't got this on a slide, and shows that during 1984 to 2014, the numbers identifying as Anglicans declined from 40% to 17%, and Catholics from 10% to 8%. Other Christians remain steady at about 18% of the British population. While there has been a decline in older Protestant churches, such as Methodists and Baptists, there has been a growth in newer churches, such as Pentecostals and Seventh-day Adventists, many of which are black majority-led. The findings are then that Christians are barely or not at all a majority in England and Wales, and Anglicans are no longer a majority amongst Christians, though of course Anglican is an elastic identity, as indeed is Christian itself, as comparing the census and the BSA shows. Yet Anglicanism does seem to have suffered a particularly steep decline. On the other hand, those who say they have no religion, turning to the middle of the slide, those who say they have no religion have gone up from 15% to 25% between the 2001 and 2011 census. And in the BSA, from just under a third in 1984 to almost half in 2014. The two data sets being more discrepant on this point than on Christians. The key point is that both data sets show the same trend and strongly suggest that it is not short-term. As for religions, turning to the bottom, as for religions other than Christianity, the BSA sample sizes are too small to be useful, but the 2001 and 2011 censuses show that significant number of non-Christian religious minorities are to be found in all the major cities and towns, and doubled in size over that decade, comprising nearly 10% of England and Wales in 2011. Being younger and having larger families, they will continue to grow. For example, while Muslims are about 5% of the population, they're 8% of those under 25. While Hindus, Sikhs, Jews and Muslims are about 12% of the 9 to 13-year-olds, 3/4 of which are Muslims, they are double that proportion in London, that is to say around a quarter. While for some right-wing newspaper commentators and editorials, the big story of the Commission allegedly was one of Christian marginalization and secular majoritarianism, my interest here is in the third point of that triangular relationship, namely the minority faiths. While each generation across the last century seems to be less Christian than its predecessor, and so few young people today deem Christianity to be important to their life, this generational indifference is much less amongst post-immigrant groups. Indeed, amongst ethnic minorities, expressions of commitment amongst the young can be exceptionally high. More than a third of Indians and 2/3 of Pakistani and Bangladeshi 16 to 34-year-olds said in a national survey at the end of the 20th century that religion was very important to how they led their lives, compared to a fifth of Caribbeans and just 5% of whites. In the case of young Muslims, the importance of religion has been rising and overtaking their elders. And so they now are a real sociological exception, because for 100 years, each generation has been less religious than their parents, but young British Muslims are the first where there is an increase, just in terms of self-statements, increase in the younger generation. This is actually the last slide, because I'll now just speak discursively about the issues on this slide. So beyond that, beyond demography, religion has a social importance for minorities. In South Asia, from where the majority of British Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims originate, religious identity has a salience much higher than in Britain. So it is not surprising that during the last few decades, religion, rather than say color or linguistic heritage or national origins, has risen in the individual and community self-identities of these minorities together with their sense of Britishness. Of course, groups are partly defined by not what they say they are, but what others, usually a dominant group, says they are. British society, as it happens, has been very receptive to ethnic minority self-definitions and redefinitions. For example, when West Indians said they were African Caribbean, when non-whites said they were not colored but blacks, when Asians said they were not black, ethnic minority collective self-projections quickly altered public discourses and prevailed over older nomenclature. So similarly, when ethnic minority groups such as Pakistanis started dismissing Pakistani and Asian for themselves in preference for Muslim, the wider British public, especially the media and public organizations, fell in line. This does not necessarily refer to religiosity, but is a recent manifestation of the well-known phenomenon that Jews generally and Catholics in locations like Northern Ireland can call themselves and be called by others as Jews and Catholics respectively, even if they're not religious, and may even be anti-religious. We're here clearly talking about group identity or ethno-religious community membership, not belief. Of course, as indicated above, what minorities are usually unable to do is to control the meaning of terms. This again is most evident in the recent period, especially after 9/11 and in Britain, especially after the July 2005 bombings in London, what we sometimes call 7/7, in relation to Muslims and Muslim identity or public discourses of Islam. Muslims may have demanded recognition qua Muslims and may have propelled that identity into public discourse and popular consciousness, but very few Muslims have sought to have Muslim mean fanatic, fundamentalist, misogynist, separatist, or terrorist. But anyone familiar with current affairs and how it is reported in the British media knows that this is what, to many, Muslim currently connotes in Britain. This stereotyping of Muslims, part of the phenomenon generally called Islamophobia, can be understood as racialization, as I mentioned up there. Not simply because that is what happens to groups designated as races, nor even because non-whiteness is closely associated with being a Muslim, but because it is to treat Muslims as if they were a single racial or quasi-racial group. The dissonance that one might experience here in accepting the idea that a religious group is a race can be eased by considering the general case of how the Jews have been racialized. Indeed, in continental Europe, the Jews are the quintessential race, as well as the specific cases of Catholics in Northern Ireland or Muslims in the ethnic cleansing rampages in the former Yugoslavia. In this regard, it is worth noting that the CMEB recommendation, or the Perec recommendation, that discrimination on grounds of religion or belief should be outlawed, began to be fulfilled from 2003 onwards. Initially only in relation to employment, following an EU directive, later also covering services, and was fully implemented in the Equality Act 2010. In that act, religion or belief as a ground for discrimination was put on a par with all other grounds for discrimination in the strongest anti-discrimination legislation in Europe. The Corab was very mindful of the phenomenon of religious discrimination and of how it was often based on a racialized view of religion and intertwined with racial discrimination, suggesting that the term ethno-religious, a legal concept in Australia, captures an aspect of this. it did make a recommendation for the law to better understand this intertwining. But in the light of the 2010 Act, there was much less scope for it to make recommendations in relation to discrimination than might be the case in many other countries. It should be clear from the above that the meaning of religion can vary between religions, in particular between Christians and non-Christians, or between being a member of a majority or a minority religion. For Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs, religion is not just about belief, but also sometimes primarily about community and cultural heritage or identity, including resisting stereotypes about one's own community or discriminatory treatment. Yet another way in which religion is not just about belief is that it often requires a public performance or behavior. For example, in relation to codes of dress or food, and so is much more publicly visible and sometimes requires institutional adaptation in order to be accommodated. While this is barely a feature of modern, especially Protestant Christianity, where inner belief can be considered sufficient, and it is often deemed unnecessary, perhaps even inappropriate, to display markers, even a cross, of one's faith, this is quite exceptional in global and now British terms. Most religions require the observance of rules of piety, and Britain is experiencing such practice-based religions re-entering the public space, Muslim dress being the most visible and contentious, after quite a long period in which such religion has been eroded away or transformed into private belief. So putting it very simply, one could say we've had a majoritarian privatization of religion, and then a generation later we're now having a minority publicization, or making public of religion. So we've got two counter trends, though to some extent separated by, say, 25 to 50 years. Institutions in areas of public life which have given up the need to accommodate Christians are now having to adjust to the needs of minority faiths, and sometimes stimulating Christian reappraisal of its retreat from public piety. For example, the display of a wearer's cross, as in a case that perhaps you probably don't know, the Avida case that went up to the European Court of Human Rights. So some Christians are now saying, why can't we display the cross above? For instance, this was a British Airways steward. She wanted to wear a cross above her British Airways uniform, and British Airways didn't allow it. She took the matter, and it went all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights, and she won. Dietary requirements, space for worship, and gender relations, besides dress, are also prominent as elements of religious praxis that institutions such as schools, hospitals, and prisons, and even workplaces are being asked to adjust to. Adaptations of codes of dress or uniforms, or provision of vegan, vegetarian, kosher, and halal meals, places for worship and time off to use them are the kinds of requests being made upon state institutions, universities, employers, even when no parallel provision exists for Christians and is not being requested for by Christians. This praxis-based accommodation is a significant multiculturalist challenge because it is not simply a matter of granting minorities provisions already enjoyed by the majority, but a matter of respecting minority religions in ways that Christians may be indifferent to in relation to their own faith. And of course, it is not just a symbolic recognition that is being requested, as substantive provisions or institutional changes are sometimes necessary. The net result of what I've been describing is that minority religions have come to have a significant, even if contested, public presence. Public campaigns for inclusion and equality, conflicts over faith schools, women's dress and gender more generally, not to mention all the issues to do with the war on terrorism and Islamicist radicalism, has made religion much more politically prominent and in public affairs generally. Public dialogue, representation and leadership is often sought and realized by those who define themselves in terms of religious community organizations. Whilst these are some of the reasons in which religion has become more publicly salient and in which the meaning of religion has changed, and so some appropriate public learning is required. It has also to be acknowledged that most people are losing touch with their own religious heritage, let alone understanding the new significance and variety of religion. At this juncture of simultaneous growth in ignorance about religions and their rising public, political, international and geostrategic importance, CORAB makes one of its central recommendations, namely that there's a substantial need for raising the level of religion and belief literacy amongst the public, journalists, policymakers, and various kinds of professionals. The suggestion that the low level of public understanding of religion is a problem and needs to be remedied is not new to CORAB. What I believe is distinctive about CORAB is the understanding of religion that it is said greater literacy is needed of, namely religion which is extended to include secular belief systems, yet which is not reducible to belief, for it includes pious practice, as for example in relation to dress, which is a community or ethnic identity, especially for minorities, and which is intertwined with racism, such as in the case of anti-Semitism or Islamophobic racializing of Muslims as the other. This complex, multidimensional understanding of religion, the lack of literacy in which is a serious problem of public life, is a thread across the report and is fundamental to the report's discussions of law, the media, education, social action, and dialogue. Just as CORAB's generalization of the legal concept of religion or belief has extended religion in one direction, so the ideas of praxis, racialization, and identity in the concept of the ethno-religious has extended it in another. Moreover, religious literacy is required across society, and especially by opinion formers and policy shapers and implementers, because religion in this extended sense has something to contribute to the common good. But this is not a crudely pro-religion view, nor just because secular beliefs and ethno-religious communities are folded into it. CORAB recognizes religion as a public good, but also as a public bad, i.e. when it can be a problem. And so for both these reasons, governments have a legitimate and indeed a necessary interest in it. So, my conclusion. In CORAB, then, there is a thinking about the nature of multiculturalism in a changing context. In particular, with how religion, and not just color, becomes the marker of minority status and of otherness. Most importantly, it is about the interaction of race, ethnicity, on the one hand, and religion in the extended concept of ethno-religious, which, when combined with an extensive concept of religion and belief, by an extensive concept of religion and belief, meaning including secular belief, displays in the British context a reworked concept of religion. At the same time, there's an affirmation in an evolving plural British national identity, one which cannot be taken for granted, but must be revisited as a work in progress. If the Commission on Multi-Ethnic Britain, the Perec report, is perhaps one of the most forceful statements of that view, a more balanced position is offered in CORAB. Perhaps CORAB was merely trying to state the message of the earlier Commission more clearly and avoid the brickbats received by the latter. If the Commission on Multi-Ethnic Britain was interpreted as overemphasizing the deconstructive attitude towards received notions of national identity, Korab was careful to project a more constructive tone. I think that is a distinctive aspect of Korab, as is the endeavor to indicate a balanced, intertwined, and evolving relationship between the Christian, the secular, and the minority faiths through an implicit affirmation of the existing moderate secularism within established church, but more specifically through an extended concept of religion and belief, and what I've been mainly talking about here, an extended concept of the ethno-religious.
National Research Council in Madrid, and he has published extensively on religious diversity, is a well-known expert on Canada and Latin America, but presenting now on Spain, with the triggering title Unreported. So please, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if this is my right size. Yes. Yeah.
It should be higher for you.
Okay. So, bonjour tout le monde. Je voudrais d'abord commencer à remercier Solange Lefebvre, je ne sais pas si vous êtes ici, pour l'invitation de participer dans ce colloque et de partager des opinions, des points de vue avec des collègues. J'ai dépensé, quand j'étais plus jeune, beaucoup d'argent à l'Alliance française à Madrid, mais je ne me sens pas confident pour donner ma présentation en français, donc je parlerai en anglais. Okay. All right, so very easily, in Spain there have been no equivalent commissions on reports on cultural diversity, like the Perec Commission in Britain, the Stasi Commission in France, or the Foblet Commission in Belgium, or Bouchard-Taylor Commission in Canada. So it's in this very basic sense that I'm meaning that Spanish diversity has been unreported, has not been reported yet, or will never be, I don't know. But nevertheless, Spain is a highly diverse country. It's a multilingual country. It has overlapping and conflicting national identities, as you very well know the situation now. And it also has asymmetrical political structures in its territorial organization. So these are usually the chapters or the topics that appear in contemporary literature, international literature on diversity or pluralism in Spain. But the country also, in the last 20 years, especially before the economic crisis, it also received several million immigrants. It was one of those new immigrant countries. And since the 90s, I'm saying we had about 5 million immigrants, which at one point made up to 12% of the population. That has come down a bit with the crisis and is picking up again with the economic reactivation. So in spite of these traits and the historical difference and political experience difference with Canada and Quebec, Quebec and Canada have been very often seen with interest from Spain, because they have been seen both sometimes like a model and like a political mirror. As a model for the management of the pluralist management of diversity. And as a political mirror, because when it comes to thinking of the difficulty of organizing the political cohabitation of different nationalities within a territorial frame. But there are further points of connection I want to make between Quebec and Spain that will bring us to the issue of this seminar. It is that both Quebec and Spain, through the so-called Quiet Revolution in the 60s, and in Spain with the transition to democracy in the late 70s, both left behind a particular kind of reactionary, very conservative Catholicism and the kind of social values and relations that were characteristic of that time. I'm thinking of the Duplessis period, what's called the La Grande Noirceur, the Great Darkness, and what in Spain we call national Catholicism. That's this combination of authoritarian nationalism and Catholic traditionalism that gave Franco's regime its very particular brand. But of course, if we try to gain a historical view, the political role of institutionalized religion in Quebec and in Spain was very different. institutionalized Catholicism. Now, as you know, in Quebec, very much like in Poland or in Ireland, the Catholic Church was kind of bulwark of the nationality after the British conquest. Whereas in Spain, the Catholic Church was an enemy of the national state since its very inception in the 19th century. So most of the modern state competences and jurisdictions, civil rights, management of cemeteries, marriage, all of that, had to be carved out of the jurisdiction of the church. So there is also in Spain a long tradition of tensions with the Catholic Church, a long tradition of anti-clericalism, which had some very violent periods, like during the Civil War, when a few thousand priests and nuns were executed, killed in the Republican side. But there's a big difference, too, of how this institutionalized religion worked in the process of modernization in both societies. Because I think an interesting issue is that in Quebec, the church in the 1960s, in the period of the Second Vatican Council, in Quebec, like the church came to accept the social and political modernization of Quebec and somehow resigned itself to lose some of the former influence that it had. Whereas in Spain, the church was allied with Franco regime as almost the very last period of the regime. In the 70s, then things changed, 4 or 5 years before Franco died. But it has been traditionally very resisted to the opening or to the cultural and social changes that have came out with modernity. And even until very recently, the church has been the main opponent of gay marriage, or even to the introduction of civic education in the curriculum. So this kind of cultural wars are still 40 years after the transition to democracy are commonplace and are recurrent in Spanish politics. No? So in Spain, the transition to democracy in 1978, late 70s, not only meant the restoration of the standard democratic liberties and civil rights, but also it meant somehow the secularization of the state. Because society is largely secularized and had an autonomous process of secularization, but the secularization of the state was an issue during the transition. So the new constitution, the constitution that was issued after Franco's regime, 78, so that constitution in Spain ceased once again to be a non-confessional state. In the Republican times, it was non-confessional, but Franco made of Catholicism established denomination. No? So the new constitution disestablished Catholicism, and there is Article 16.3, which says there shall be no state religion. But immediately after, there is an interesting addenda, which says, but it establishes a duty of appropriate cooperation between the state and the Catholic Church and the other denominations. So this is a kind of, in constitutional terms, of contradictory statement. It has created no coherent body of legal interpretation. In fact, sometimes it has created some problems to legitimize certain public policies. One has come, especially when later on the immigrants started to arrive and religious diversity became a fact. And it has created then a model, or I don't know if it's to be called a model, but some people use it in Spain, that Spain is a non-confessional state, as being different from confessional state or being a laïque or laïcité in the French style. Just falling down. So, well, in this context, so I'm telling you, the secularization of the public status of the Catholic Church has been seen by many people still as a pending account from the transition to democracy, and it creates, I'm telling you, recurrent cultural wars on the public status of the Catholic Church. But then, since the 1990s, when the first waves of immigration started to arrive, and among them a significant amount of immigrants coming from North Africa, then the interest in the management of diversity came out. And in the 90s, multiculturalism became a buzzword, like in so many other countries. Well, once in a while, public debates on Muslim garbing and xenophobic discourse have surfaced. But the truth is that multiculturalism has been more, or the management of diversity has been more a political catchphrase than. Okay. I ended up putting it here. Okay, so I'm telling you just that even if multiculturalism became fashionable, like everybody all over the world in the 1980s, really the political management of cultural and religious diversity has been more of a catchword for politicians than a consistent, coherent policy. And we have to take into account that well, this integration policies or diversity management in a place like Catalonia meant something different as in other parts of Spain, just like here in Canada and in Quebec. It has different meanings and connotations. No? And I'm saying that some of this insufficient or non-effective secularization of the state in the 1990s have shown now, in this new context, have become a handicap for trying to manage this kind of diversity. For instance, when it comes to education, a large portion of the primary education is in hands of the Catholic Church through subsidized schools. So they work like public schools. You don't pay, you hardly pay anything. They are territorially organized. So sometimes happens that Muslim children, because they live in such a neighborhood and they need a school place, they have to go to a Catholic school. Sometimes that's no problem. Sometimes there are problems, like when a girl wanted to wear the headscarf, a Moroccan girl, and they told her she couldn't do it in a school that was run by nuns. Nuns carry veils, so it was kind of contradiction. So that shows you all the contradictions that this kind of institutional setting inherited from the transition create when you have to deal with diversity. Anyway, all of this has not, and unfortunately, the state also collects the taxes for the Catholic Church, and then it distributes it according to a certain formula, and if it doesn't reach a certain amount, the state puts it there. It also finances the Catholic religion lessons in the schools, but the instructors are chosen by the bishops. But if they are fired, the unemployment has to be paid by the state. They have offered that to the imams, but that depends on agreement with Morocco. So, I mean, it creates all kind of dysfunctionalities and contradictions. Anyway, in spite of all these features and contradictory situations that I'm telling you, is it that this has not prevented the relatively smooth incorporation of the new ethnic and religious minorities into mainstream society, no? And that there might be several reasons for this, or this might be only perhaps only a provisional situation. No? One reason could be that immigration is still a quite recent phenomenon, where only the second generation is now coming of age, and you know that usually integration problems come with the second or with the third generation. The first generation is too busy trying to make their way into society and climb up the social scale. A second reason might be that general schooling for all immigrant children, independent of their legal status, doesn't matter if their parents are in a regular situation or not, all of them have been offered free schooling or public schooling, even in Catholic churches, even if they're Muslims. And also that there is a universal provision of healthcare has have a strong integrative potential among these communities. And sometimes small things like providing little scholarships or bourses for the canteen, for midday lunch and things like that. No? So I think this is a good opportunity now to give second thoughts, to reflect for a moment on what integration might mean and to which extent it can be modeled or can be the outcome of some kind of social engineering. There's a French sociologist, Abdelmalek Fayad, who has reminded us, as a very, I think, very suggestive point of view. He reminded us that integration is a socially elusive and unending process that cannot be consciously obtained and is only grasped after the fact, when it actually fails. You know? His words literally are, integration is an unconscious, almost invisible process of socialization that cannot simply be the outcome of the political voluntarism of a given society. That's his word. So, well, I'm a philosopher by formation. and it's interesting to have a look or to think about, let's say, the contradictory ontological nature of the idea of integration. No? Why? Because by trying to integrate some persons or groups, we are making them conspicuously different, seeing them as unintegrated. You know? And inversely too, sometimes their own effort to integrate will make their need to do so more evident. So so this idea of integration could be likened somehow, if you take it in a phenomenological way, like a conscious attempt to lose some form of conscience. So Fayad said that it's like wanting to sleep or wanting to forget. So by the very act of wanting to do it, you are rendering it impossible. So by wanting to sleep keeps you awake. Wanting to forget keeps you recalling what you want to forget. So, I mean, Fayad means that he says that integration cannot be a political goal by itself, that it can only be the collateral, or can only happen as the collateral effect of other goals, other kinds of goals. Okay? So you don't have to agree with him or to support all his ideas, but I think it's a good chance or a good notice to a reminder of the limited capacity of social policies in front of the complexity of complexly structured realities and in front of locally embedded social and cultural meanings. You know. So to call the attention about the limits of thinking of integration as a product, a conscious and a direct product of social engineering. Because some societies that have not actively sought integration policies, or at least not identitarian integration policies, sometimes they are relatively better integrated than other societies that have not done so. Then we come to the methodological discussion of how to measure integration, if it's intermarriage, if it's social mobility. You can go to somebody and ask, are you integrated? And what does it mean? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I feel myself not very integrated in my city. I'm explaining what I do. You have political philosophers, strange thing. My wife is Jamaican. She's very much better integrated than me in my town. So it's an interesting idea to think about what do we mean by integration, and what are the added meanings that we can see in it. No? Well, everybody knows, and the former presentation put an example that ethnic categories, classifications, differentiations are the product of local knowledge and local practice. So, for instance, the meaning of race in the United States and the idea of race and all the meanings that are ascribed to it are very different from the ideas of race that highly complex ethnic societies like the Caribbeans manage. You know, in the States, you know, there is kind of no intermediate categories, either you are black or white, whereas in Caribbean societies, Jamaica, Cuba, so there is a wide range of concepts and ideas and associations about the different possible ethnic mixtures. So sometimes ethnic categories only are understandable in the local context, and they are not, we cannot grasp them from outside. So you need some kind of local training to be able to understand all the meanings that are attached, discrimination, favorization that are attached to certain local categorizations. How race, phenotype, religion work out to create a certain classification of people in a particular place. You know? So I'll finish then with this kind of reflections to leave to things, to ideas open for reflection. So it's that many of the social interventions that have been designed by some integration policies and programs, commissions, reports, so some of the social interventions designed by these kind of instruments not only are conceived in a very strong instrumental manner, but they also have to operate within a political and cultural frame that heavily conditions their possible results. Just think, for instance, the different meaning of speaking about integration in Quebec or in English Canada. I wouldn't go into this metaphysical distinction between interculturalism and multiculturalism, but obviously the history of both policies is different. The reality in which it has to be applied is different. You know that multiculturalism came out as of initiative of Trudeau and a reaction to the nationalist movement, French nationalist movement, Canadian French in the 90s, and how it was perceived with so much mistrust from here from Quebec, thinking that that was like trying to dilute this particularity of the French-Canadian fact, and how interculturalism came later. We know that there are different studies, different stories, so the background of these policies are very different. Also could ask why there have not been this accommodation crisis, as far as I know, in English Canada, and they have been here in Quebec, and how the reactions have been so different. So that's the first thing I leave open. And then my second one, and with that I finish for discussion, is that some integration policies that are more openly identitarian perhaps have been less effective than other kind of social programs that are addressed to in another direction and that have had as a collateral effect a higher degree of integrations. And if we look at the Bouchard-Taylor's Commission final recommendations and conclusions, it's interesting to see how four things, and that's the only thing I use. First, it's addressed, basically, the recommendations are addressed to the accommodating society, not so much to those who were supposed to be accommodated. So that's very interesting. Second, well, you have two kind of recommendations that are of a very kind of technical character, you know the need to increase the harmonization skills of public agents and the need to promote these interculturalist programs, so this is more of a technical recommendation. But then you have also two other recommendations that focus on non-strictly identitarian issues, like the stress of anti-discrimination measures. Anti-discrimination, understood in the tradition of civil rights, does not necessarily have to do with identity, but it can have a collateral effect on the integration of the society. And Francisization, the promotion of French language as a tool of integration. Well, it's not identitarian in the sense of dealing with minorities, but basically that's a basic cultural tool to make people coming and communicate and live together. And so being able to speak to, have developed the competences to speak the common language, the langue propre ici, is an indirect tool that can promote integration. And then I was found very interesting, and this is the last thing, the panel yesterday with the journalists, because the last address or the diagnosis on the source of the accommodation crisis places it outside of all this interaction between minorities and majorities and focuses to something like its media coverage. And this era where we are now, where alternative facts, post-truths, the creation of prejudices through the social media, that's something that has gone out of the control of the policy agencies, and they have a very strong capacity to make cohabitation or integration difficult. But they are, let's say, they don't enter in the world of multiculturalism, let's see. It's not part of the multicultural industry that has been so much overblown. And however, indirectly, they have a direct consequence on the integration of a society.
Okay. Thank you so much. Today, we've talked about traditional immigration countries, Canada, the UK, Spain, also a traditional immigration country. Now we go to a country that is not a traditional immigration country, but rather an emigration country, to Poland in particular. So I would like to announce Magdalena Dębinska, a political scientist here from the University of Montreal, and Katarzyna Karnaziewska-Mikalska from the Foreigners Office in Poland, please.
Bonjour, alors merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Je me réjouis en fait de passer après professeur Colhomme parce qu'il a mis la table pour des pays qui ne sont que récemment d'immigration et encore pays catholiques. Et parce que nous, ce qu'on nous a demandé de présenter, c'est les modèles d'intégration des immigrants et les consultations publiques en Europe centrale. Alors le titre est « Teasing ». Vous allez être très déçus parce que il n'y a pas de modèle d'intégration, il n'y a pas de consultation publique. Vous allez être encore plus déçus parce que nous allons essayer, mais nous n'avons pas trouvé de traces d'écho de la Commission Bouchard-Taylor en Europe centrale. Bref, nous allons quand même prendre une vingtaine de minutes de votre temps pour vous parler du cas, plus particulièrement donc, du cas de la Pologne, qui est un État national, un État qui se définit par sa nation, et un État qui est traditionnellement et qui est toujours un État, un pays d'émigration et non pas d'immigration. Vous allez me dire, qu'est-ce que je fais ici? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait ici? Vous allez voir. Donc, ce qu'on observe en fait en Europe centrale, c'est qu'il y a une pression migratoire, il y a des pressions européennes, il y a des modèles qui circulent en Europe d'intégration des immigrants, et cela enclenche un processus des débats publics sur l'immigration, sur l'intégration, sur la diversité. Et c'est un peu dans ce contexte qu'on voit... donc, c'est dans ce contexte qu'on va regarder qu'est-ce qui se fait ou ne se fait pas en Europe centrale et de l'Est, quels sont les modèles qu'on regarde, quelles sont donc les idées directrices et les dynamiques qui sont quand même au niveau national, sociétal et local qui circulent. Et plus particulièrement, donc, on va s'intéresser au cas de la Pologne. Encore une fois, je répète, il n'y a pas de politique d'intégration des immigrants, c'est inexistant. Par contre, ce qu'on va montrer, c'est qu'il y a des processus par le bas qui commencent à émerger et qui sont fort intéressants, qui s'inspirent des exemples donc, européens, pas vraiment des exemples canadiens, québécois, malheureusement. Notre point de départ, donc... Notre point de départ, c'est ça. C'est difficile de coordonner quand on est deux. La question qu'on va se poser, en fait, c'est en Europe, aussi au Canada et au Québec, on remet en question quelque peu, avec les commissions, etc. On se pose la question sur les modèles d'intégration républicains, libéraux, multiculturels, interculturels, etc. Et certains chercheurs en Europe observent qu'il y a une convergence vers un modèle qu'on nomme un modèle civique qui demande en fait à l'État à être extrêmement impliqué, actif dans la fabrication des citoyens. Donc, un peu pour reprendre la présentation précédente, l'ingénierie sociale, finalement, c'est ça qu'on fait des citoyens, des immigrants. Et cela se fait autour de la langue de la société d'accueil, l'histoire de la société d'accueil et la culture de la société d'accueil. Du coup, ce que d'autres chercheurs observent, c'est que oui, il y a une convergence vers un modèle civique, mais en même temps, tous ces modèles civiques sont teintés par l'ethno-national. Ça a des allures ethno-nationales. Pourquoi? Parce que les catégories et les politiques sont en fonction du contexte et des pratiques particulières du pays. Donc, qu'en est-il avec la Pologne? Nous sommes partis, notre point de départ, en fait, est le rapport des commissaires, parce que nous avons trouvé que le Québec et la Pologne ont quand même pas mal de... On peut faire des parallèles malgré toutes les différences. Si on adopte la perspective qui est adoptée par les commissaires dans le rapport, une perspective plus large qui inscrit le modèle québécois dans sa dimension historique, sociale, identitaire, etc. Donc si on regarde dans cette dimension, et pas la dimension juridique, il y a quand même des parallèles qui sont possibles à faire entre le Québec et la Pologne, notamment. La Pologne a ses craintes et ses contraintes, et ses inquiétudes, la sécurité identitaire. Donc en fait, la survie identitaire, c'est une des anxiétés très présentes en Pologne. Donc, insécurité qui est perçue liée à la position géographique. Donc, je ne vais pas vous faire un cours d'histoire, mais la Pologne a changé de frontière de multiples fois. On a été déplacé de l'Est à l'Ouest, de l'Ouest à l'Est. On a disparu pendant 123 ans de la carte géographique entre la fin du XVIIIe siècle et le début du XXe siècle. Donc, il y a la position géographique amène une insécurité. On perçoit aussi donc l'anxiété, l'insécurité, la culture, la survie de la culture polonaise et finalement le catholicisme qui est un marqueur identitaire extrêmement fort et important en Pologne avec l'Église catholique qui est toujours profondément ancrée dans la société et les politiques de la Pologne. Et juste pour vous donner peut-être une idée de la force mobilisatrice de la religiosité, du catholicisme, de l'Église, qui souvent est récupérée par les politiciens. Je vais vous donner un exemple très récent. Dimanche, il y a 2 semaines, il y a une action qui a été organisée qui s'appelle le rosaire jusqu'aux frontières, qui consistait à appeler le monde à faire une chaîne humaine le long de la frontière de la Pologne avec un rosaire et faire une prière, le but étant de demander la protection du territoire polonais. Vous pouvez imaginer de quoi. Donc, et il y a vraiment eu une mobilisation. On a mis quelques photos ici, voilà, le long de la frontière polonaise, il y a eu des mobilisations et avec le rosaire, donc on a fait ces prières-là. Non seulement dans ce contexte, il est difficile, c'est un défi de taille de parler diversité, de parler des modèles d'intégration des immigrants, etc. C'est un défi de taille parce que d'un côté, vous avez donc la pression migratoire, la pression européenne, et toutes ces anxiétés-là, dans un contexte d'état d'émigration, en fait. Donc, ce qui est aussi particulier dans le cas de la Pologne, et pas seulement la Pologne étant ici représentative, finalement, de toute l'Europe centrale, comme la République tchèque, la Croatie, l'Estonie, etc., c'est que la population immigrante, ce sont des immigrants ou pas immigrants, parce que ce sont des populations historiques qui, en fait, sans avoir bougé, ont changé d'état parce que les frontières ont bougé. Donc, c'est un peu particulier comme contexte. Donc, il y a il y a quand même beaucoup de minorités historiques, mais très peu d'immigrants et de réfugiés. C'est vraiment une fraction de la société. On partage, bien entendu, le passé communiste qui ont contrôlé sous ce système-là tant l'immigration que l'immigration. Et en fait, ces pays-là ont toujours été, jusqu'à très récemment, vus par les immigrants comme un transit. Donc on rentrait en Union européenne, mais on ne restait pas en Pologne ou en Europe centrale, on se dirigeait vers le Royaume-Uni ou l'Allemagne, etc. Du coup, puisque c'est un pays d'émigration, l'intégration des immigrants n'est pas sur l'agenda politique, n'a pas été sur l'agenda politique, ce n'est pas un enjeu qui était présent en tout cas jusqu'à très récemment en Pologne et sur les agendas politiques. Cela dit, je vous ai annoncé qu'il n'y a pas de modèle d'intégration des immigrants en Europe centrale et de l'Est. Eh bien, à part une exception, la République tchèque s'est dotée d'un tel modèle en 2000, qui fonctionne très bien, qui a été salué par Bruxelles, parce que, comme on a mis ici quelques chiffres, plus de 74% des immigrants venant de hors de l'Union européenne ont un emploi en République tchèque. Ils font pas partie des pauvres, de la pauvreté en République tchèque. Cela dit, si on regarde l'opinion publique en République tchèque, eh bien la population tchèque est très réticente en fait aux immigrants. Donc c'est le pays qui est parmi les plus sceptiques quant aux bienfaits de l'immigration, tant du point de vue économique que culturel. Ce qu'on dit d'habitude de ces pays-là, Europe centrale et de l'Est, eh bien voilà, ils sont intolérants envers l'immigration parce que on n'a jamais vraiment eu l'expérience de la diversité, il n'y a pas eu d'immigration, on n'a pas eu de contact avec la diversité. Mais si on regarde de plus près, là on retourne en Pologne, on s'aperçoit que les études qui ont été faites, c'est le European Value Survey. En 2002 et 2012, en fait, la Pologne se porte très bien dans le sens de la tolérance envers les immigrants. Si vous voyez, la Pologne, c'est la ligne orange. Et on considère qu'en fait, on est mieux avec des immigrants que sans immigrants. Notre pays se porte mieux avec les immigrants que sans les immigrants. Et le score est meilleur qu'en Allemagne et dans d'autres pays. Donc, pas si mal. Deuxième, juste pour vous montrer, lorsqu'on pose la question aux Polonais, quels sont les groupes, quels sont les peuples avec lesquels on n'aimerait pas vivre à côté, bah, bon, ça va mieux, c'est mieux qu'en Allemagne. Hein. Très bien, on est très tolérants. Cela dit, lorsqu'on pose la question sur la religion, eh bien, le portrait s'assombrit énormément. Parce qu'en 2013, comme vous voyez, il y a plus de 34% des Polonais qui considéraient qu'il ne faut pas faire entrer des musulmans sur le sol de la Pologne. Et en 2015, ça a été confirmé par différents sondages qui ont été effectués en Pologne qui confirment qu'en fait, on est très ouvert à recevoir des réfugiés de l'Ukraine. 60% de la population polonaise est pour accueillir les réfugiés ukrainiens qui sont chrétiens orthodoxes, mais lorsqu'on pose la question sur les ressortissants de l'Afrique et du Moyen-Orient, l'image est complètement différente. Donc c'est vraiment la question de la religion qui fait obstacle, ou en tout cas il y a beaucoup de réticence et résistance de la part de l'opinion publique. Lorsque vous êtes bien au courant du refus de la Pologne, notamment de la Pologne, de recevoir des quotas des réfugiés imposés par Bruxelles, et comment on explique ça? Bien, ce sont des peurs identitaires. Première chose, donc la composante identitaire, la religion, les peurs sociales, les peurs économiques, peurs politiques, peurs pour la sécurité, etc. La souveraineté, c'est quelque chose de très cher aussi. Bien entendu, ça ne fait pas très longtemps que la Pologne a regagné la souveraineté suite au joug soviétique. Et la question de la souveraineté donc, nationale et la perception de la perte de souveraineté nationale est quelque chose qui ressort énormément. Comme je mentionnais, la Pologne est un pays d'émigration. Il n'y a que, au plus, 2% de la population polonaise représente une population d'immigrants. C'est vraiment au plus. 96%, presque 97% de la population polonaise s'autodéfinissent comme étant des Polonais ethniques. On est vraiment dans un cadre très homogène. Les minorités qu'on a sont très petites, historiques, sont très petites mais très sensibles. On pourrait faire une autre présentation sur nos Kashoubes, les Silésiens, Lituaniens, etc. Et ce qui est aussi marquant, c'est que sur une population, en Pologne, on a 40 millions de personnes, il y a 20 millions de personnes qui sont à l'extérieur de la Pologne. Donc, c'est juste pour vous donner la grandeur des chiffres un peu de où en est la Pologne et les pays en fait, de l'Europe centrale et de l'Est. Cela dit, on voit qu'il y a une pression migratoire, non seulement l'Union européenne qui pousse pour la Pologne pour recevoir plus d'immigrants, plus de réfugiés, mais on a de plus en plus d'étrangers qui s'installent, même si c'est des fractions, on s'entend, mais il y a quand même de plus en plus d'étrangers qui s'installent en Pologne. Ce sont surtout des gens de plus de l'Est, donc les Arméniens, les Biélorusses, les Russes, les Ukrainiens, etc. Mais on a quand même commence à avoir des petites communautés de Vietnamiens, de Chinois, et bien sûr, il y a des Britanniques, des Français qui viennent travailler en Pologne. Je pense qu'on va passer rapidement sur, si vous voulez voir les chiffres, on peut revenir plus tard. Mais tout ça pour dire que beaucoup de chercheurs font un parallèle entre la situation actuelle en Pologne et en Europe centrale et de l'Est avec en fait la situation des années 70 dans le monde occidental. Donc on est vraiment à ce stade-là, on commence à expérimenter l'immigration, c'est quelque chose de très nouveau. Et on se limite, donc du point de vue juridique, on se limite à contrôler nos frontières et assurer qu'il y a la légalité du séjour. Et tout est pensé en fonction des besoins du marché. Et donc c'est vraiment la même situation. Les systèmes, il faut juste peut-être rappeler que les systèmes, les modèles d'intégration des immigrants dans le monde occidental, on les a vus mis en place seulement à partir des années 90-2000. Donc ça a pris quand même beaucoup de temps avant de se pencher, de penser les immigrants non comme étant des gens en visite, mais comme étant des gens qui vont rester et il faut les intégrer. L'état des politiques de migration donc, en Pologne est inexistant. Il manque de vision intégrale, les politiques sont ad hoc et il manque aussi de système migratoire. Il y a juste 2 institutions qui s'occupent vraiment des migrations, qui sont régies par 2 lois différentes. Il n'y a aucune coordination entre ces instances-là. Mais la bonne nouvelle, on arrive à la bonne nouvelle, c'est qu'il y a quand même 2 tendances qui se dessinent à l'horizon. D'un côté, il y a une effervescence, c'est vraiment une effervescence d'études, de recherche académique sur l'immigration, sur la diversité. Et il y a une panoplie, une multitude d'initiatives des ONG qui cherchent à aider les immigrants, cherchent à aider les réfugiés, cherchent à trouver des bons programmes. Et ils sont financés par l'Union européenne, et parce que l'État polonais ne finance pas ça nécessairement. Et ce qui est aussi important, c'est qu'ils vont chercher l'expertise à l'extérieur. Donc on va se tourner notamment vers l'Autriche et le Portugal pour voir comment est-ce qu'on gère la diversité dans ces pays-là. Et deuxième tendance qu'on observe, c'est des initiatives locales au niveau de la municipalité. Et ça c'est très récent, ça a commencé avec un concours des villes ouvertes en 2014. Et c'est dans ce contexte-là que la ville de Gdańsk se démarque de toutes les autres villes. La ville de Gdańsk, en 2015, a débuté des travaux intersectoriels et interdisciplinaires sur la mise en place d'un modèle d'intégration des immigrants au niveau local. Ça a été, pendant 1 an, les travaux ont débuté en mai 2015 et en juin 2016, le document, le modèle de 192 pages est entré en vigueur. Il a été voté au conseil municipal et est entré en vigueur à Gdańsk. Cela dit, et contrairement peut-être à ce que la Commission Bouchard-Taylor était là pour essayer de solutionner des problèmes, à Gdańsk, il n'y a pas vraiment de diversité ethnique autant que telle. On parle de quelques 1000 personnes étrangers, tous statuts confondus, 8 familles de réfugiés, 50 familles de Polonais rapatriés de l'Est. Donc, d'accord ? Donc, l'objectif n'était pas de gérer les problèmes. Gérer, j'aime pas le mot, mais bon, gérer les problèmes de diversité, mais plutôt de prévenir, voir dans le futur, avoir quelque chose dans le futur. Ce qu'on remarque, c'est que ce modèle a quand même un esprit civique. Un esprit civique dans le sens qu'il essaye de transformer, et c'est explicitement dit dans le document, transformer les immigrants en citoyens de la ville. Donc, on essaye on rejette l'assimilation, on veut éviter la ghettoisation et on parle de l'intégration comme un processus d'interaction mutuelle, mais autour de la langue, de l'histoire et de la culture de la société d'accueil. Bien sûr, ça devait être sanctionné par l'archevêque. Donc, l'archevêque de Gdańsk a dit que, en fait, c'était une réalisation laïque du commandement de l'amour de Dieu et du voisin. Et le maire de Et le maire de Gdańsk a aussi annoncé que même si nous, ici, on est principalement des catholiques, ben nous, on veut prôner le catholicisme d'ouverture. Bien entendu, dans le contexte de non-diversité à Gdańsk et dans le contexte de la mise en place de ce modèle qui vient en même temps que le gouvernement central refuse d'accueillir les quotas de réfugiés imposés par Bruxelles, beaucoup de critiques disent en fait, ce n'est pas une question de gérer la diversité, c'est une question politique de contrepoids et contre le gouvernement central. Et d'ailleurs, ce qui est aussi important de dire, c'est que ce document, je vais le dire tantôt parce que ça va être important, mais contre ces critiques, j'ai sauté quelque chose? Ok. D'accord. Excusez. Des processus d'élaboration, je vais faire vite parce que j'ai plus le temps apparemment. Ce qui va être important de dire, c'est qu'on cherche l'expertise donc des villes, des Eurocities. Donc on implique énormément les villes européennes pour donner des recommandations, les séjours d'études, etc. Donc ce processus d'élaboration du modèle cherche des repères, cherche des modèles ailleurs. Et deuxième chose, on fait des consultations. Alors, il y a des consultations publiques. Les technicalités, on va les laisser tomber, mais les consultations, finalement, sont critiquées aussi parce qu'on fait des consultations une fois le document est rédigé, et entre les consultations et la mise en vigueur du modèle, il y a 7 jours qui se passent. Donc, il n'y a pas de modification du modèle suite aux consultations. Bon. Donc, avec la critique, on peut se poser la question pourquoi on a fait le saut. Donc, d'un côté, cette critique du politique, et de l'autre côté, je finis, le maire de Gdańsk qui souligne l'héritage multiculturel et l'héritage de solidarité de Gdańsk. C'est dans la vibre de Gdańsk de faire ce genre de modèle. Et on peut donc peut-être appréhender ce premier pas, ce premier modèle en Pologne, dans le cadre de city branding. Je ne sais pas si vous connaissez le concept, mais en fait, ce qu'on met de l'avant, c'est le mythe multiculturel de Gdańsk, en faisant référence à Hansa, une association commerciale médiévale où tout passait par Gdańsk. Donc, Gdańsk, c'est la croisée des chemins. Et la solidarité, parce que déjà au XIVe siècle, Gdańsk offrait la protection aux réfugiés européens, notamment le roi suédois s'est retrouvé à Gdańsk parce qu'il a été défait par des partisans du roi danois. Et c'est mis de l'avant dans les discours du maire. Et bien sûr, Solidarność des années 80 est né aussi à Gdańsk. Donc, ces mythes-là sont utilisés. La marque de commerce de Gdańsk devient donc la ville-pont, ville ouverte, ville-liberté, ville de solidarité. Et cela dit, peu importe l'objectif premier de l'initiative d'élaborer un tel modèle, on peut dire qu'il y a quand même un réseau de villes ouvertes qui se forment parce que maintenant Gdańsk rassemble d'autres villes, Bydgoszcz, Gdańsk, etc., qui dernièrement, en juin 2017, ont fait une déclaration comme quoi ils vont collaborer à échanger les expériences, les expertises et les bonnes pratiques d'intégration des immigrants dans les villes. Donc il y a quelque chose qui se passe par le bas. Et donc en conclusion, parce que, d'accord, je vais conclure, dans un État qui se définit par l'homogénéité de sa nation, les politiques d'intégration des immigrants sont vraiment au second plan. Par contre, avec les pressions, le contexte migratoire, les pressions européennes, etc., le processus est enclenché, mais il est enclenché surtout au niveau local. Au niveau local où on voit donc la fabrique des immigrants citoyens des villes et des modèles qui sont empruntés des villes européennes. Et donc c'est par ce processus bottom-up que finalement la transformation semble s'opérer. Je n'ai pas de boule de cristal. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. not least presentation, I want to announce Professor Anne-Laure Zwilling from the Centre National de Recherche Sociale in France. Published extensively on religious minorities. I believe one of your books is on display, so this is some free publicity. It's on display outside. And you're also chair of a famous website, the URL website. And actually your presentation now will not go in only one country, but will take this wide-angle view on multiple countries, on which you can find information on the URL website. So it's www.url.info for the people who want to check whether everything is going right, what you were saying. So.
Alors, courage, c'est la dernière. Alors, je suis membre d'une unité de recherche CNRS située à l'Université de Strasbourg, collée dessus, qui regroupe des spécialistes du droit et des sciences sociales des religions. Et à la fin des années 90, cette unité de recherche a cherché à valoriser leur approche interdisciplinaire des questions de religion et à rendre disponible pour un large public une information fiable et objective sur les religions qui manquaient et qui manquent encore souvent dans un bon nombre de pays. Ainsi est né donc, le projet EUREL, qui a été évoqué là tout de suite, qui est mené par mon unité de recherche DRES et conjointement avec le laboratoire groupe Sociologie, Religion, Laïcité à Paris. C'est un site d'information sur l'état juridique et sociologique de la religion en Europe, avec une vision très large de l'Europe qui fonctionne en s'appuyant sur un réseau de correspondants dans chacun des pays pris en compte. Le tout premier site a ouvert en 2003 avec 8 pays et puis il s'est enrichi rapidement en acceptant d'autres pays et il en comptait 16 en 2010, 25 en 2015. La présentation du site s'est naturellement modifiée en fonction pour s'adapter au nombre de pays puis pour profiter des progrès de l'informatique. Et aujourd'hui, nous comptons 32 pays. Le site intègre le Canada depuis cette année et a changé de ce fait son slogan. On devient un site d'information sur la religion en Europe et au-delà. Comme ça, maintenant, c'est largement ouvert. L'information est fournie sur le site avec une structure similaire pour chacun des pays pour faciliter les approches comparatives. Il y a donc une série de chapitres qui fournissent d'abord une vision d'ensemble du pays et puis exposent la situation juridique et sociale de son rapport aux religions et enfin proposent une série d'ouvertures. L'une des rubriques s'intitule « Débat actuel » et restitue les questions concernant les religions qui émergent dans le débat public. Vous voyez ici la page d'accueil du site qui affiche les débats récemment ajoutés. Et en principe, il y a autant de débats que l'actualité l'exige et on demande un minimum d'un débat par semestre. Ces débats sont en général des articles assez brefs. Ils comprennent une introduction qui explique la discussion, ce qui l'a suscité, qui évalue son importance dans le pays. Il y a ensuite un bref rappel des faits qui décrit les différents protagonistes, leurs déclarations, leurs actions, qui éclaire leur motivation et qui expose les enjeux de l'affaire et son écho public et médiatique. Il restitue donc ce qui fait débat dans une société avec une approche de type universitaire, en suivant donc l'actualité, mais avec un peu de recul, un peu de distance à l'émotionnel. Dès les débuts du site, il a été décidé de ne pas détruire les articles qui traitent des débats passés, mais au contraire d'en garder trace pour pouvoir en suivre l'évolution, parce qu'il arrive souvent que quelque chose émerge dans le débat public puis soit repris 2, 3, 5, 10 années après. De ce fait, aujourd'hui, plus de 15 ans après l'ouverture du site, nous disposons d'un historique assez important qui constitue une base à partir de laquelle je propose maintenant d'analyser les débats publics qui ont agité différents pays d'Europe autour des questions de religion. Alors bien sûr, ce n'est pas une sociographie complète, d'une part parce que tous les pays n'ont pas la même ancienneté sur le site, et d'autre part parce que les correspondants nationaux sont plus ou moins prolixes, plus ou moins réactifs, n'ont pas toujours la même disponibilité. Donc la dimension subjective n'est pas totalement absente de ces données et l'approche que je vous propose là n'a pas l'exhaustivité ou la précision d'une enquête qualitative complète. Il s'agit juste de brosser les grands traits d'une dynamique. La méthode que j'ai suivie, elle est décrite ici. Rassembler à partir du site URL tous les articles de la rubrique débat qui évoque la diversité religieuse, ce qui a fait plus de 190 articles. Si j'avais su, j'aurais jamais proposé de faire cette intervention d'ailleurs. Bon. Un certain nombre de sujets évoqués dans cette rubrique, comme les interventions des responsables religieux sur les questions de procréation, par exemple, auraient pu être intéressants, mais c'était un peu marginal, donc je ne les ai pas retenus. Les articles, je les ai ensuite regroupés par thème lorsqu'ils portaient sur des sujets similaires, et les ensembles constitués, je les ai organisés pour dégager les grandes lignes des questions qu'ils portent, pour finalement repérer et décrire les dynamiques à l'œuvre. Lorsqu'on organise ces articles, un premier ensemble frappe par son importance. C'est celui que j'ai regroupé ici sous le titre des relations Église-État ou relations religion-État. Ça représente 67 articles sur l'ensemble, c'est donc assez important. Bon, notre réseau de correspondants rassemble des spécialistes des sciences sociales, des historiens, des théologiens, mais aussi un bon nombre de juristes. Alors peut-être que c'est ça qui explique cette importance accordée aux questions juridiques. J'ai appuyé sur une touche et je me suis partie ailleurs, donc je ne retrouvais plus mon texte, excusez-moi. Voilà. Donc le fait est en tout cas que la reconnaissance légale de groupes religieux dans les pays qui sont dans un régime de culte reconnu constitue 38 articles. On y trouve aussi bien le débat qui a agité la Grèce en 2002 sur la normalisation du statut de l'Église catholique, par exemple, que celui qui a été discuté en Lettonie l'an dernier sur le statut de l'Église orthodoxe autonome. Il s'agit de la reconnaissance de groupes religieux minoritaires, certains qu'on attendait probablement, comme l'islam ou les témoins de Jéhovah, d'autres qui peuvent être plus surprenants, comme la scientologie dans plusieurs pays, les copimistes en Suède ou les pastafariens, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, pour ceux qui connaissent, en Pologne. 3 articles concernent la restitution des biens confisqués aux églises dans les anciens pays communistes, 5 le financement par l'État d'écoles confessionnelles, de médias religieux ou des cultes. J'ai aussi regroupé 9 articles sous le chapitre Neutralité de l'État ou séparation de l'État et des religions. On y trouve l'abolition des confessions religieuses pratiquées dans les écoles en Grèce, le débat sur les tribunaux islamiques au Royaume-Uni et aux Pays-Bas, et quelques débats suscités par des fédérations athées ou des fédérations de libres penseurs demandant l'établissement de cimetières athées au Danemark, l'établissement d'enterrements non religieux ou de cérémonies du souvenir non religieuse au Royaume-Uni, par exemple. 5 autres concernent les prises de position des États par rapport au blasphème, au Royaume-Uni, en Turquie, aux Pays-Bas. Une dimension importante de la séparation des États et de l'État et des religions est celle de la neutralisation religieuse de l'État civil, qui a souvent, dans plusieurs pays, été liée à la question du mariage des couples de même sexe. Ce débat, on le trouve au Danemark, en Irlande, au Royaume-Uni, en Chypre, etc. Sur le même sujet, avec une approche inverse, il faut aussi noter que la Cour constitutionnelle de Turquie a annulé en 2015 une loi qui interdisait de célébrer le mariage religieux avant le mariage civil. Ces questions qui touchent à la neutralité de l'État se prolongent par celles des symboles religieux dans les édifices publics et des déclarations confessionnelles faites par les membres du gouvernement. Sur les 7 articles concernés, on va trouver aussi bien la question d'un drapeau mis en berne pendant les fêtes de Pâques en Espagne récemment, qu'un discours de Theresa May sur l'importance de Pâques pour le pays. On trouve la question des symboles religieux au travail aux Pays-Bas et la question des crucifix dans les hôpitaux suisses. J'ai regroupé à part, et ça va me servir de transition, la question des signes religieux dans les édifices publics lorsqu'il s'agit des écoles. L'importance des écoles, autant sur le plan symbolique qu'en termes de transmission, ressort clairement de l'ampleur des débats qui ont concerné les questions de religion à l'école. Outre les discussions bien connues sur le crucifix dans les salles de classe en Italie, Allemagne et Autriche, et un peu en France, on trouve ici également un débat récent sur la présence d'icônes dans les salles de classe en Roumanie. Plusieurs débats concernent la présence ou l'absence d'un enseignement religieux dans les écoles et son caractère obligatoire ou facultatif. On trouve ça en Espagne, en Grèce, en Chypre et en Belgique. Le contenu de ces programmes d'enseignement religieux et le glissement plus ou moins facile et plus ou moins accepté d'un enseignement confessionnel à un enseignement au contenu plus moral et civique a suscité 16 articles dans lesquels on retrouve la Grèce, l'Allemagne, la Turquie, Chypre, la Pologne, l'Italie, l'Espagne, la Roumanie, la Belgique et le Royaume-Uni. Enfin, l'impact de l'appartenance religieuse sur la scolarisation, la question des écoles confessionnelles, qu'il s'agisse par exemple des tests de compétences religieuses utilisés pour sélectionner les candidats à une école en Irlande, ou encore du refus d'admettre un enfant non juif dans une école confessionnelle juive en Angleterre, ont suscité 8 articles. J'ai regroupé après un autre ensemble qui concerne les pratiques religieuses. Les pratiques vestimentaires vont là me servir à faire le lien avec la thématique précédente, puisque je viens de France, vous y avez certainement pensé, c'est autour de la question du foulard islamique à l'école que les débats ont commencé. Après la France, le débat s'est également tenu en Allemagne et au Royaume-Uni, avec parfois d'autres groupes religieux pris en compte, comme la question du port d'un anneau de pureté par une élève, ou encore celui du bandeau porté par une enfant sikh. Là encore, des controverses sociales. Les discussions sur le foulard islamique ont rapidement été suivies par celles sur le voile intégral. Là, pas moins de 14 articles évoquent des controverses en Autriche, en France, aux Pays-Bas, en Italie, en Belgique, en Espagne, au Royaume-Uni, en Suisse, en Lettonie. 2 articles traitent des pratiques vestimentaires des sikhs et 1 des pratiques vestimentaires chrétiennes, là, en l'occurrence le port de la croix. L'abattage rituel, une pratique religieuse alimentaire, a suscité 8 articles qui concernent 6 pays et l'alimentation halal 3. La circoncision a plus récemment fait l'objet de débats dans 3 pays. J'ai également trouvé dans 8 pays mention de discussions portant sur la construction d'édifices religieux. Là, il s'agit essentiellement des mosquées, mais on trouve également la question pour les édifices des groupes protestants ou orthodoxes dans certains pays. La France, l'Espagne, l'Allemagne et la Suisse ont connu des débats portant sur la formation des cadres religieux, essentiellement là en ce qui concerne l'islam. Pour récapituler, les débats que j'ai trouvés sur EUREL peuvent être organisés en questions qui portent sur la relation entre État et groupes religieux, sur l'école et la religion, sur les pratiques religieuses, sur les édifices religieux et sur l'encadrement religieux. Les correspondants nationaux des différents pays représentés sur EUREL accordent une importance très inégale aux rapports qui sont publiés dans leur pays sur les questions liées à la diversité religieuse. Donc cette dimension-là de la prise en compte de la religion par la société, je n'ai pas pu l'analyser à partir du site, ça aurait été trop inégal. Mais il y aurait certainement eu matière, car bon nombre de pays fournissent cette information et les pays dans lesquels elle figure, ce qu'on a témoigne de la richesse des réflexions nationales et de l'importance de ces états des lieux réflectifs. Avec ce rapide parcours, je ne peux malheureusement pas restituer les différences de tonalité qu'il y a entre les pays et la diversité des prises en compte de questions similaires dans des contextes nationaux différents. Ces contextes nationaux ont toujours naturellement une grande importance et parfois une importance très, très pratique, très pragmatique. Le statut juridique, par exemple, des religions va déterminer bien sûr la pertinence de certaines questions. Les régimes de culte reconnus vont susciter des débats sur la reconnaissance de communautés et ces débats ont naturellement moins d'importance dans les pays où les retombées financières de la reconnaissance de l'État sont moindres. Cela mis à part, on peut quand même formuler quelques remarques d'ensemble. On constate d'abord l'importance de la matière. Je ne m'attendais pas à avoir autant d'éléments portant sur des sujets aussi variés qui sont de l'ordre aussi bien de la pratique ou du droit que des valeurs et qui se jouent au niveau des individus comme au niveau des collectivités. Ces débats sociaux sur les questions de religion sont d'une complexité croissante et cette complexité est encore augmentée par la fréquente difficulté à dissocier culturel et religieux. Par ailleurs, même si les musulmans et l'islam font l'objet d'une part importante de ces débats, il faut noter que les questions de diversité religieuse mettent en jeu, au niveau de l'Europe, d'autres groupes religieux. Il faut également constater qu'il n'y a plus de questions qui restent au niveau national. Les contextes et les débats sont bien sûr différents, mais aucune question maintenant ne s'arrête aux frontières d'un pays. C'est aussi ça, bien sûr, la mondialisation. Il y a rebondissement, contagion, diffusion des débats, des controverses, des questions d'un pays à l'autre. Et parfois, j'ai vu émerger en regardant ces débats relativement récemment, des débats qui émergent quasiment de façon préventive. Explicitement, par exemple, un article traitant de la circoncision aux Pays-Bas commence par « après le débat en Angleterre sur le sujet, etc. ». De la même façon, on a une extension des débats qui concernent les tribunaux islamiques entre les Pays-Bas et le Royaume-Uni. On note aussi un certain malaise dans le rapport aux religieux, dont la place dans les débats publics est parfois sans commune mesure avec l'importance numérique ou sociale du groupe, ce qui tend à entretenir parfois les idées négatives sur les religions qui sont source de problèmes ou source de difficultés, etc., qui à son tour augmentent encore les controverses lorsqu'elles surgissent. Enfin, dernier élément, remarque finale, on constate, je constate, restons clairs, la perte de pertinence des analyses qui fonctionnent en termes de relations majorité-minorité pour des raisons de globalisation, parce qu'une religion qui est minoritaire à un endroit va être majoritaire ailleurs ou vice-versa, etc. Et donc, comme les choses se jouent moins dans les contextes nationaux, cela perd de son importance, et aussi parce que, comme l'exposait Tariq Modoud sur le contexte anglais tout à l'heure, il y a aussi des pertes d'influence des religions qui étaient traditionnellement très établies et très importantes, on le voit aussi en Espagne, et que ça dilue un petit peu ces relations majorité-minorité. Vous allez me remercier parce que quand j'avais révisé ce PowerPoint, il avait pris beaucoup plus de temps, donc j'ai compressé un peu, ce qui fait que j'arrive déjà à mes remarques conclusives. C'est bien. Je vais conclure ce parcours très rapide avec 3 remarques. D'abord, la diversité religieuse croissante rencontrée en Europe suscite et nourrit les débats qu'on vient d'évoquer, mais ces débats sont aussi suscités par une évolution sociale, notamment sur le plan des valeurs. J'en donnerai 2 exemples. Les discussions, notamment autour de l'abattage rituel, avec un changement certain de perspective par rapport à la souffrance animale. Si on prend la situation entre maintenant et il y a une 50aine d'années dans la majorité des pays, qui sont passés de pays agricoles ou avec une pratique de ferme, et donc un rapport à l'abattage des animaux qui est complètement différent de celui qu'on connaît dans les pays industrialisés d'aujourd'hui. Donc voilà une première illustration. Une deuxième illustration qui concerne les débats que je n'ai pas pris en compte, mais qui sont les rapports à l'homosexualité, par exemple. C'est là évident que c'est un changement de perspective par rapport aux valeurs qui implique des débats plus importants. Voilà, c'est mieux. Une deuxième remarque. L'ampleur des controverses suscitées par la diversité religieuse va, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, renforcer l'idée que ces religions sont un facteur de problèmes et de discorde, et ça, à son tour, nourrit encore le débat, d'accord ? Il faut donc souligner que ces confrontations d'idées, pour rester sur le versant positif, sont aussi l'attestation de la liberté d'expression dont on jouit dans la majorité des pays d'Europe et de la possibilité de mettre ces débats sur la table. Donc c'est plutôt un signe positif, le signe de la recherche, de l'amélioration du vivre ensemble. Donc pour conclure, pour rattacher ma présentation à la thématique Bouchard-Taylor, qui est celle de ce colloque, et dont j'étais quand même, je dois dire, un peu éloignée, avec l'excuse naturellement qu'en Europe, bon, ça a eu moins de poids. Alors, comme ce duo a été décrit hier, un peu en termes de pessimiste et optimiste, voilà, je vais dire que l'ampleur et la persistance de ces débats montrent qu'aucun pays d'Europe n'a encore, à l'heure actuelle, trouvé la façon de gérer sans heurts la pluralité religieuse croissante que les pays connaissent. Ça, c'est la dimension pessimiste. La dimension optimiste, de dire que tous ces pays cherchent à établir un vivre ensemble serein et qu'en soi, c'est déjà une bonne chose. Je vous remercie.
We are going to continue our travel across the globe. We've had the UK and we've had Poland, a couple of other European countries, We have had Spain, of course, and now we go to the Nordic European countries, to Scandinavia. I would like to introduce Professor Inge Forseth, a well-known scholar, especially in the field of sociology of religion. And she will take us to the Nordic European welfare state in her presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
I would like to thank Solange in particular. I don't think she's here, but please extend my thank yous to her for inviting me to speak on the Nordic country, or Scandinavia. So where is Scandinavia? You may laugh, and I don't mean to be rude, but I'd like to clarify a little bit. It's way up north in Europe. But we distinguish between the 5 Nordic countries and Scandinavia. The 5 Nordic countries are Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Scandinavia are the 3 countries that are around the Scandinavian peninsula: Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. And I will primarily talk about the 3 latter. So sometimes I reference the Nordic countries, but mostly I'll speak about Scandinavia. So looking from the outside, these countries look mostly very similar. They all have a fairly stable, generous welfare states. The last years, all of them have experienced a turn to the right politically, with some in my country, I'm from Norway, by the way, where a right-wing populist party is now part of the government and has the position of the Ministry of Immigration. They are also characterized by large Lutheran majority churches. After the Reformation, they became state churches. Now we call them majority churches, mostly because they're not state churches anymore. I'll go back to that. And there is a growing religious diversity, especially in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Less so in Finland, and not a whole lot in Iceland. This paper tries to address, okay, so how do they manage religious diversity? And I will in particular look at the state-religion relations, and I will also, oops, it's down in my stomach. Not much voice there. I will also try to explain some of why they're different, because looking from the outside, I know a lot of people think the Nordic countries are one and the same, but they're actually not. And some of my main argument is that that policies on religious diversity take place within nation states, and they tend to follow old traditions of how to manage diversities and religion. Which is evident in these countries, but they also look to each other, so there is some movement in a similar direction. But let's look at the, yes, I'm doing a little bit different here than what the slides are doing. But let's look at the religion and state relations. What has happened during the last years is that there has been a growing separation of religion and state. In fact, Finland had a separation as early as 1920s. But it's in the Finnish case, the majority church, which in all the countries, the large churches are Lutheran, much functioned as the other Nordic countries. What happened here is that in Sweden in 2000, there was a formal separation of church and state. Norway followed suit in 2012 when politicians decided across the political divide that there should be a separation of church and state, which have been followed up in legal cases. The only country now with a traditional state church is actually Denmark. And Denmark in this part of the world seems to constitute kind of an exceptional case. The other countries are moving more in the same direction than what is taking place in Denmark. But is there a wall of separation between church and state in the other countries? No. The states tend to draw on the churches when it's convenient for them, in national rituals, for example. Also, you have odd rituals like in Sweden, where the end of school, primary school celebrations, before they go on summer holiday, they gather in the local parish, Lutheran church, and have a parade to the school with flags and everything. So there is this odd kind of combination of religion and state still. There have been several Scandinavian commissions. Solange mentioned yesterday the Norwegian report, A Society Open to Religious and Worldview Diversity, which came in 2013. What is special about that report and different than a lot of the other reports I've heard about is that they did not try to end in one conclusion on all the issues they discussed. They let the commission be open and concluded usually with a majority and a minority view on all issues. And they would specify who was in the majority, who was in the minority, and people in the commission often voted, not systematically. And they would provide argumentation for their views. So the report was extensive, giving all the arguments why this conclusion was reached, which means that this report is now extensively used by politicians because they can find argumentation for different positions within the report. In 2015 came a Swedish report on new regulations for state support for faith communities. What happened in Sweden in 2000 was that the majority church was placed on an equal level as other churches, and now they wanted to figure out how should they actually, the state, fund communities and how should this be regulated. And as I prepared for this talk, I knew about the last issue, namely the September 2017 Norwegian legal proposal on faith communities. And I thought, okay, you better update yourself. It's 240 pages long, and I spent the last weekend sweating over this legal proposal. And then I realized, oops, there was also a Danish legal or commission in March 2017, so I had to dig into that. So what is actually happening here that is, the things are changing as we speak, more or less, in the Nordic countries. But I'm sorry to say that the Bouchard-Taylor Commission is not mentioned in any of the reports. I asked a member of the Norwegian report, why not? And she said, I don't think we even knew about it. We hadn't heard about it, so we didn't even think about that. But another, I'm sorry, these things, I think that supports my main argument. These things also tend to be local in some way. But there is also this other tendency in all the reports to look to each other, to look to the other Nordic countries. They don't reference EU commissions or other European reports, but they reference each other. And even in the Danish commission, they excluded Finland and Iceland for being too different. So they only wanted to look to Sweden and Norway because they were the most similar cases. Another reference that is very pervasive is international human rights legislation. That is referenced continuously. One thing that all of these reports deal with is recognition or registration. You may wonder why. Because all of these countries have freedom of religion, but faith communities may register or attempt to be recognized by the state They don't have to, but they may do so, and a lot of them do because it gives them a legal status where they can apply for tax exemption, for public funding, for the right to perform marriages, for example. So it gives them a better situation in many ways. But the countries differ when it comes to which faith communities should be recognized and which should not. Norway has had the lowest threshold. Up until now, one of you and I could form a faith community and just register and say this is what we want to do, and we would get state support for 2 members. There were very few requirements. But the new legal proposal tries, and why? To save money, and it says it explicitly, to save public funding by extending the level or the requirements, heightening them. One is that it should have a minimum of 500 members. So they explicitly say faith communities don't have that many members. They should join with others to form larger communities. What is specific about Norway and also Iceland is that it extends recognition to what it calls worldview communities. It could be a holistic community. They have a community in Norway, but also the secular humanist. They are excluded in Finland and in Denmark. So the secular humanist is actually a big and very politically powerful worldview community in Norway that is very strong on equal rights for everyone, etc. So it's actually very important in protecting the rights of the small communities. Sweden is placed in the middle. Here all faith communities may apply for public funding, but the minimum requirement is that you have 3,000 members. And they focus, for example, on that a faith community must have a worship service. And since secular humanists don't have worship services, they are excluded. And they also have a statement: they must contribute to maintain and strengthen society's fundamental values. These are some new signals coming in of requirements. Denmark has traditionally had stricter requirements. For example, they had to apply to a government-appointed committee that is consisting of experts in religion and law. But they also focus on a creed. In their new proposal, the new commission is suggesting that the requirement of creed should be lowered. The numerical size should actually be reduced from 150 members to 50 members only, so they now become, Norway now is starting to be more strict than Denmark. But they have also included this commission that the faith communities, and I quote, must be organized according to principle of membership, democracy, and equal treatment, including gender equality. They don't now ask that a Catholic priest should be a woman, but they are asking that in the highest authority in the faith community, the General Assembly, should be run according to democratic principles and gender equality, which is stricter than the other countries. Norway doesn't want to go that far. It says we want to entice faith communities to go in that direction. We don't want to make it a matter of law. But all of them, and especially in Denmark and Norway, are now including proposal for things that their faith communities, if they do so, they can lose their recognition. If they don't follow the law, in Norway there are several reasons. If they don't protect the rights of children, the liberty of others, if they receive public or funding from states that do not support religious freedom, they can lose, meaning Saudi Arabia, of course, they can lose their public funding or recognition. I know the funding situation here is probably different than most of you are used to. In Norway, there is a very generous state support. All faith communities now receive an equal amount per member per year, and they don't have to apply for it. They automatically, and the sum is about $1,000 per member per year. And there is a strong principle of equal treatment. Everyone should, also the secular humanists and the holistic community. And in the new legal proposal, the idea is to continue this public funding, and you may ask why. Well, it's stated that religion is good for society. They also acknowledge that religions could be problematic, but on the overall, it's good for society. In Denmark has kind of a middle situation. The church tax is the main source, and the direct state subsidies are much lesser. And Sweden is actually the least generous state support. All faith communities can apply for public funding, but the public funding is very small. It's like 13 euros per member per year. And so they give less coverage. So altogether, we get a situation where Sweden has the most separation from the state. The Church of Sweden is the most autonomous. There is a low threshold for faith communities, but a higher threshold to receive public funding, and the least amount of state funding. And they also have tried now in their new proposal to diversify funding, so some faith communities will get more than others. Norway, also a growing separation from the state, but a low threshold for recognizing communities, but the most generous state funding. A kind of a curious fact is to look at the city of Oslo now has several newly erected mosques. Erect new mosque in Norway is not very controversial anymore. And you see in some parts of town, there's almost a new, beautiful mosque on, several corners. It's all within walking distance. And of course, due to the public funding of religious communities. Denmark has the least separation of state. Actually, the Church of Denmark has little autonomy, and it actually led to a situation where the Church of Denmark has difficulty on a national level to engage in interfaith dialogue because no one represents the Church of Denmark. It's actually the state that represents, or the minister of church that represents the church. And it has a higher threshold for recognition, but attempts to lower it to be more like the other Scandinavian country. So, how should we explain their similar and different public policies? Well, traditionally, Sweden has been the most multicultural society among all the Nordic countries. The immigration started earlier in Sweden. It has much higher immigration rates than the other countries, and very early adopted multicultural policies. In the beginning, I'm talking about the 70s now, 60s, 70s, Norway just looked to Sweden and said, whatever the Swedes do, we'll do. But then after a while, they started to modify. The policies in Denmark were actually very different. Denmark emphasized assimilation much more, their own language, the adaptation to Danish values, Danish culture, etc. So what are the factors I'm looking at? Well, one is immigration rate and religious diversity. As I mentioned to you, the immigration into Sweden has been much higher than the other countries. It started earlier. A lot of these population increases is due to immigration because the birth rates, they're higher than many other European countries, but they're not that high. And in Europe, Sweden has been one of the most liberal countries. Actually, during the refugee crisis in 2015, Sweden was one of the countries next to Germany that took the most refugees relative to its population. I think about 70,000 immigrated to Sweden that one fall of 2015. In Norway, about 30,000 immigrated, and Denmark has been the most restrictive. So the amount of faith communities outside Christianity is much higher in Sweden and Norway than in Denmark. Now with our right-wing immigration minister in Norway, she's competing with the Danish minister to be the strictest in Europe. So I think our immigration now is one of the strictest in Europe. This came after 2015. Integration policies, all the countries balance between immigration control and welfare state integration. Like I mentioned, Sweden was very multicultural. At first, Norway followed Sweden, and Denmark became much more assimilationist oriented. They are kind of going in somewhat the same direction now, or becoming more similar. Sweden has become more strict, for example, after 2015, and Norway as well. So what is driving their policies is concerns about the welfare state. The Nordic welfare regime is funded by the income tax, and it has a universal risk coverage. That means that everyone is entitled to the same kind of benefits based on citizenship. So when you have large immigration, large group who have a very loose relation with the labor force, who are unemployed, on social benefits, etc., it puts pressure on these kind of social welfare system. And since the 1980s, there has been this tendency towards neoliberal austerity policies like in other countries. For example, Sweden, which was the most generous welfare state in all of Europe, now have reduced its benefits drastically. It has all the same benefits, but less coverage in each of them. Norway and Denmark has resisted cuts, and Norway is the one that has the most generous system, mainly due to an oil industry that fuels Norwegian economy. So there are big debates of high immigration. Does it pose a threat to the welfare state? And the debates are very harsh in Denmark. They are just emerged in Sweden, and they are kind of in the middle in Norway. And that last issue has to do with right-wing populist parties. These parties have a longer tradition in Denmark. They came already in the 1970s, and very early on became an anti-immigration party. In Norway, we got a similar party, but it was first an anti-state, anti-tax party, and then became anti-immigration in the 80s and 90s. In Sweden, this did not emerge until 2012. Of a shock of Swedish immigration had been a non-issue in Swedish policies. In 2012, there was almost like a political slide to the Swedish Democrats that were anti-immigration. So now they have several seats in the parliament. So these debates are now emerging in Sweden. I will conclude. I will just mention one more thing that I think plays a role in this, why these countries differ. The religious diversity, in spite of being majority Lutheran, have been more pervasive in Norway and Sweden than in Denmark. In Norway, the diversity consisted of very conservative lay Lutheran groups that achieved some sort of political power through a Christian democratic party. So Norway has this tradition of dealing with religious conservatives from way back to the 1800s. Sweden, you've also had a lot of minority churches, whereas in Denmark, the majority church was so liberal that it included everyone. So it was kind of just everyone belonged to the same fabric, so to speak. So my argument is that these public policies are then linked to their experiences with religious diversity. Also, I would include human rights legislation, but also there are other policies when it comes to immigration, integration, and welfare state policies. Thank you.
With Dr. Anna Haleloff first from Deakin University. Gary first, yeah. Okay, then but I introduce you both, and then I leave the whole presentation to. So second will become Anna Haleloff from Deakin University, senior lecturer in sociology, and first in the presentation is Professor Gary Bauma, professor of sociology, with the UNESCO chair in intercultural relations at Monash University in Australia, but also connected to Ottawa University and connected to many different organizations that I'm not going to name all of them because it will come at the cost of your own presentation time, and well, the priority should be your presentation. So they take us to a case study far away in Australia on the state of Victoria, and study whether the Bouchard-Taylor committee was then referred to in the Victorian case. So that's the continuing story.
I'd have to say we didn't spend an awful lot of time with the Bouchard-Taylor Commission in Australia either, because, well, it's a long way away and we think we're different. But we did learn about it because we've been involved with the Laurie Beeman Religion and Diversity Project, and so learned about it there. And that's been very helpful. But the other thing we learned about in that project was that context is so terribly important. And if you don't know the context, then you're going to have a hard time talking about what's going on. And what's true in one context may be totally confusing in another. What's worse, in Australia, each state thinks that about itself. We have 5 states, and they were former colonies, and they are different. And so we'll be focusing somewhat on Victoria within Australia. My aims are to give you some national and Victorian data to give you some context, and Anna will come in and talk about the sort of commissions that have occurred within Australia. So, first of all, we've got about 50,000 years of diversity. We cherish that and honor that, and it is it's becoming more and more part of our national story, as it should be, with that many years of indigenous history with 250 languages, 600 and so on dialects, richly diverse cultures, many societies, nations, etc. Diversity is natural and normal to Australia. 2.8% of Australians identify as indigenous. In the 19th century, during the gold rush, all kinds of people came to Australia, and so we had more Muslims, although they'd been coming from Indonesia before, and Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs at that time. So religious and cultural diversity is part of our deep history. Part of the problem was, and we'll see it in the next table, is that when Australia was founded as a nation in 1901, they instituted a white Australia policy. And so immigration had to be white and basically British and preferably Protestant. And so you'll see in this data that Anglicans reigned supreme. They were actually 41% in 1921. Catholics dipped. White Australia policy went against them. They were basically Irish until that time, and it changes through. MCPRU is Methodist, Congregational Reform, Presbyterian, and Uniting. Lump them all together as British Protestants. They're still on a hiding to nowhere. Christians, 52%. The state of Victoria is now officially less than majority Christian, which is interesting in itself, looking at the Victoria column at the end. The 2016 census data there, 30% declaring themselves to have no religion, which is a huge jump over 10 years. It was a straight line jump. It wasn't just a single hard to explain jump. It's part of a curve that's risen quickly and very important in terms of understanding the feel of the nation. If you put an age factor over this, that no religion factor goes way up for the young people, way, way up. They just aren't in it at all. But it also provides generational analysis if you want. If you were born in the 1947 era, that's what you expected about religion and diversity, et cetera, to be. But even as late as in the 1960s, there wasn't that much diversity, and there was still a very Protestant British hegemony. That's gone. And that movement of that away is what many people are objecting to in the kind of changes that diversity is bringing. The loss of a Protestant, British, masculine, patriarchal hegemony. And I think that patriarchal dimension is very important to underline because it's part of that right-wing surge at the moment. It's to find some way of restoring threatened men to positions of prominence. Okay, we also have more Muslims than Presbyterians. I like telling that in the States. They get a word about that. More Buddhists than Hindus, more Baptists or Pentecostals, and more Sikhs than Jews. That's a new one. The Jews have shifted down one notch in the order of religions. 8 times as many witches as Quakers. And our census is very detailed in its material. It hasn't come out with the most detailed results yet for the latest census. But we get that kind of stuff and can look at the ways small groups are jockeying for position in the census. But again, that whole business of there being more Muslims than Presbyterians, the Presbyterian Church in Australia is very, 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 very right-wing conservative. It's becoming evangelical and almost fundamentalist and totally anti-Muslim. Its Islamophobia almost matches its homophobia. But Buddhists, a very sizable community. Buddhists and Hindus now form very substantial communities. Buddhists and Muslims have very substantial already settled communities to which there's been a great deal of addition. The Hindus had a small settled community which has had a tsunami of immigration in the last 10 years and are very busy trying to deal with it, but at least have a basis for dealing with it, and that diversity goes on. I can run an age thing over it, and you can tell who's got a future and who doesn't. There's the national pattern. Catholics match it. Anglicans, well, pretty aged. If they put in the Uniting Church, even more aged. Put Jews in, similarly aged. Hard to find a breeding pair of Presbyterians. The Hindus, young. Muslims, very young. And of course, that's all due to migration and having a youthful population and being able to have children. So the future depends of religious diversity very much depends on migration. It always has in Australia. Our pattern of migration, our pattern of religious diversity has always been dependent on migration, as has been the composition of religious groups in Australia. Catholics are now no longer Irish, they're Italian, they're from a variety of countries. Muslims in Australia come from 63 different countries, and so presenting themselves as Muslims was a very sensible ploy in terms of increasing their weight in policy debates. Depends on birth rate, only a bit on conversion. So the major changes: nuns overtake Catholics, continued withering of British Protestants. Sorry, something did not agree with me at breakfast. And you can read the rest. That's where we wind up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The proposals of the Bouchard-Taylor Commission joined company with those of similar state-sponsored investigations of the implications of growing cultural and religious diversity for social cohesion in the mid to late 2000s, which we have heard about from various contexts already. So many of these commissioned investigations in slightly different ways propose programs designed to promote what can be described as cosmopolitan approaches to diversity, being comfortable with, indeed competent navigators and consumers of diversity, and able to negotiate life through sensitivity to the needs, rights, and orientations of others. So these 2 slides include a number of commission reports that Gary and I have either co-authored or made submissions to in recent years, like around about that 10, 12-year period. And they have had to, in varying degrees, an influence on policy and curriculum in the Australian context, but also in our home state of Victoria. So hopefully I can scroll down here, hang on. So you can see On that slide, there's a major report that Gary contributed to on religion, cultural diversity and safeguarding Australia, 2004. So obviously this is stimulated by post-9/11 events. There are 2 reports there that Gary and I contributed to that were commissioned by the Victorian government. Issues pertaining to multiculturalism and security, and also the impact of global crisis events on communities. That slide includes the report that Solange mentioned yesterday that Gary was a co-author of. And then the other 2 reports are much more recent, and both of them deal with actually reviewing the national curriculum, and we've had input into them in terms of the content on religion. So certain direct parallels can be made regarding Victoria and Quebec, linked to issues raised by the Bouchard-Taylor report, although regional specificities are also evident. I will now focus in particular on the ways in which the media and public debates on multiculturalism and religion have shaped perceptions of religious diversity in Victoria. In this discussion, similarly to one of Bouchard and Taylor's foci, we will examine so-called host societies' anxieties resulting from processes of globalisation and crisis events. Given that we have been asked to comment on the state of things 10 years on from the Bouchard-Taylor report, we will also draw largely from data compiled by the Scanlon Foundation's Mapping Social Cohesion reports, which take place during exactly that period, 2007 to 2016. And finally, we will also identify possible ways forward to alleviate these tensions from a critical and applied research perspective. So, while Bouchard and Taylor note that resistance to accommodation was quite minimal and was exacerbated by the September 11 crisis events, and while this has certainly been also documented in Australia, we can say that Australia has had a long history of both inclusion and exclusion, and that there has always been resistance to new waves of immigrants, but that this has generally settled down over time as each new group found its way in society and as other new groups began to arrive and became the focus of new hostilities, often as a result of international crisis events. So these hostilities begin with gross injustices committed against Indigenous Australians and then against non-white Christian immigrants and workers on the goldfields, the sugar and cotton industries in the 19th century. So even though Gary says we were diverse, hostilities were always present. So they were continued with the introduction of the 1901 Immigration Restriction Act, the so-called White Australia Policy. By contrast, with the Act's lifting, policies of multiculturalism were introduced by the state and national level in the late 1970s and 80s. And these policies not only affirmed a commitment to respecting diverse cultures, but also stressed the need for limits, particularly concerning the need to respect the rule of law and the rights of others. So indeed, we argue that the late 1980s and early 1990s was a cosmopolitan moment, both internationally and in Australia, where Indigenous rights, women's rights, countering environmental risks, and advancing respect for cultural diversity and sexuality diversity received increasing prominence in public debates and growing popular support. However, the mid-1990s to the present day can, by contrast, be categorised as an anti-cosmopolitan turn, evidenced in Australia by the rise of a conservative narrow nationalism and hardening of immigration policies under the leadership of conservative governments. So following the events of September 11, the Howard government linked anxiety about terrorism with fears of Islam and cultural and religious diversity more broadly, and this was exacerbated following the events of the London and Bali bombings in 2005. The Australian values debate raged across the country at this time, culminating in the Cronulla Beach riots in Sydney. The aforementioned reports all documented a rise of Islamophobia and of discrimination toward Arab and Muslim Australians following these crisis events during this period. So Howard government rhetoric, sensationalist media reporting, particularly by the Murdoch press, which dominates Australia's media, were also documented as contributing to these rising tensions. And by contrast, the state of Victoria maintained bipartisan support for multiculturalism during this period and its leaders were praised by culturally and religiously diverse communities for promoting an inclusive and welcoming society, respectful of both cultural and religious diversity. So in more recent years, following the election of Conservative Prime Minister Tony Abbott, a further hardening of attitudes to asylum seekers has occurred and remains present to this day under the leadership of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. In addition, 3 members of Pauline Hanson's resurrected One Nation party were elected to the Senate in the 2016 federal election. Hanson first rose to power and opposed immigration from Asia in the 1990s and has recently turned her concerns towards Muslim Australians. And her party looks poised for even further success in the upcoming Queensland state election. So despite this anti-cosmopolitan swing currently being experienced in Australia, alongside other societies such as in the UK with Brexit, EU, US, and earlier, I would say, also in Canada under Harper, successive Australian governments at the state and federal level have continued at the same time to release statements on the importance and benefits of multiculturalism for social inclusion and for economic gains. So to further illustrate this ambivalence, the 2016 Scanlon report states that on a positive note, 91% of respondents feel a great or moderate sense of belonging in Australia, and that 89% take pride in the Australian way of life and culture. The Scanlon Foundation surveys have also reported that since 2013, when they first asked for a response to the proposition that multiculturalism has been good for Australia, agreement has been consistently high, in the range of 83 to 86%. The Scanlon reports have also mapped attitudes to Christian, Muslim and Buddhist Australians since 2010 and found a relatively low 4 to 5% very negative or negative attitude towards Christians and Buddhists, but a relatively high 20 to 25% negative attitude towards Muslims in this same period. So while disturbingly high, the negative attitudes to Muslims, interestingly, have stayed relatively constant. So you can see up there the percentages for each of those years. What has increased and may provide some evidence of a more anti-cosmopolitan, strengthening of those attitudes is the proportion of respondents indicating experience of discrimination on the basis of skin colour, ethnicity or religion. So this has risen up from 9% in 2007 to 19% in 2013, 15% in 2015 and 20% in 2016. With that being the highest ever level recorded in the Scanlon reports. And you can see the aggregated data shows that that discrimination is 8% to Anglican, 13% to Catholics, 26% to Hindu, 31% to Muslim. So the Scanlon report noted that those most likely to reject immigration and cultural diversity were Australians over the age of 65, and the percentages are there. Those whose highest level of education was only up to year 11, and those intending to vote for a minor party or independent. And those least likely to reject immigration and cultural diversity were those aged 18 to 44, with a bachelor or higher level qualification, and those who indicated that their financial status was prosperous or very comfortable, and also those of non-English speaking backgrounds. So we conclude our paper similarly to Bouchard and Taylor, with a brief discussion of ways forward from here. As Professor Taylor also noted yesterday, we argue that there is currently an intensifying clash not between civilizations but within civilizations, and using the terms of between cosmopolitans and anti-cosmopolitans. Briefly, we define cosmopolitans as being welcome to cultural and religious diversity, including non-religious worldviews, as long as they don't impinge upon the rights of others. They value gender, sexuality, and multi-species rights alongside religious rights, and do not believe that religious rights should override the rights of other groups and species. They are concerned about rising economic inequalities and environmental degradation caused by neoliberalism, and propose that they be addressed through holistic measures that recognise the interdependency of all life and an ethic of care encompassing the entire life world. Anti-cosmopolitans' ontological security is deeply threatened by this type of reality, largely as they fear that their old doctrines and positions of privilege are being challenged. With this in mind, we agree with Bouchard and Taylor that building a promising future must firstly entail addressing economic issues of underemployment, poverty, and inequality. Given that the real root cause of some of these rising tensions in societies is the increasing precarity and inequalities produced by neoliberalism, and also as the Scanlon data indicates that those who are more prosperous generally are more likely to be respectful of diversity. We also agree that issues of inequality and discrimination are linked and must be addressed, and that the majority group, the so-called host society, and those in positions of power, including politicians and the media, need to be more mindful of the negative effects their outbursts and misinformation against minorities are having, particularly on Muslims, asylum seekers, and in Australia at the moment we have a terrible marriage equality debate raging, so also on LGBTIQ people. We also agree that societies should work to reject fear and the temptation to look inward, similarly to Bouchard and Taylor, and also backward, to false ideals of white Judeo-Christian societies which purposefully excluded and committed gross injustices to minorities. At the same time, we also agree that while societies should avoid resentment to majority religions or any anti-religious views, they should maintain a critical stance towards religion's capacity to cause harm and impinge upon the rights of others. However, where we part from Bouchard and Taylor's ways forward is that we do not believe that the edification of a common identity based on a common language, sharing of common values and symbols is sufficient to address the challenges we are facing 10 years on from 2007. Instead, we agree with Ulrich Beck that we need to actively promote the capacity to negotiate and thrive in a more cosmopolitan reality, which respects diversity as long as human and more than human rights of all are respected equally. Similarly, emphasising a common identity with common values and symbols risks further privileging the majority and excluding minorities, unless the common identity is one that is explicitly named as super diverse, culturally, religiously, gender, sexuality, and multi-species diverse, and global, with local particularities but deeply connected globally. Indeed, the intersectionality of inequalities needs to also be highlighted, as does global interdependency between diverse nations, religions, and cultures, and of multiple species. So, perhaps somewhat controversially, what we're moving towards in our thinking is actually closer to something coming out of Canada. Which is the LEAP Manifesto. A more radical change to combat the more pressing risks of our times, climate change, precarity, and inequality. In order to prepare citizens who are able to make use of, negotiate, and value diversity, we need more cosmopolitan stories, symbols, and rhetorics of interdependence and equal rights, along with brave and articulate leadership to espouse, enable, and embody them. Laurie Beeman is also kind of exploring this new territory in her work on deep equality and total conservation, so we'll hear from her later. So, while anti-cosmopolitan alliances of religious and non-religious conservatives are gathering momentum, we also agree with Judith Butler and Naomi Klein that the most effective measure to counter them and to rebuild and repair a more harmonious life world is the formation and strengthening of progressive alliances based on an ethic of care and what I have previously termed net peace with reference to cosmopolitan multi-faith movements. And finally, the other key factor is education. So as the Scanlon studies clearly demonstrated, educated and young Australians are most likely to be in favour of diversity. And as Bouchard and Taylor similarly indicated, and as was noted in the opening panel yesterday, our hopes are with the younger generations, for whom super diversity and the need to respect it, alongside the rights of others, is a reality. This is largely as a result of their, or our, lived experiences, and we argue also of relatively progressive education systems, which must also be preserved and strengthened. And ending on a optimistic note, the Victorian government has recently included specific content on developing worldviews and religious literacy and interreligious understanding in secular government schools, learning from educational programs